Please welcome our next presenters to the stage, Ezz Tahoun and Lynn Hamida.
I think I'm losing my mind, trying to stay inside the lines. It's like you're running in place. Yeah. How you keep staying the same. Yeah. But baby, I guess I'm something different, and I'm okay with that.
Hello, hello. Hey there, everybody. I know they always save the good stuff till the very end. I know we're keeping you from a million things that you can be doing right now. Not really. But I'd love to tell you a little about a very extremely nice topic, which is AI. I'm a big believer that AI is not about AI. AI is about an actual use case. So I'm going to focus on the use case. And the use case today is going to be contextualizing everything. Why? Because we believe that context is all you need. You don't need anything else. And context essentially just means, tell me what alerts, logs, events, incidents, stuff from my historian, stuff from my SIM, stuff from my IDS, stuff from my vulnerability management, stuff from my asset inventory, whatever it is, what is actually related to what? Tell me how to correlate, tell me how to contextualize, and you got me, right? So let's talk a little about that. But before we go there, anybody has experienced a cybersecurity breach before? Of course, yes. No one wants to raise their hand. That's fine. Although we might be ashamed to say so, but pretty much statistically, like most of the people in this room, if not all of the people in this room, went through a cybersecurity breach, right? And I remember mine. I was 13, and I was really pissed. And I remember it was pretty simple. And today, when I look at cyber incidents, they are really complicated. Things are getting better. You know, like a while back, people thought that, Stuxnet was pretty bad. And then we saw Colonial Pipeline, right? And we were like, Stuxnet was not too bad. Like things keep on getting worse somehow. And
attacks are very stealthy, and they're only getting worse every single year. That's why only 9% of them are getting detected. And we receive more than 10,000 alerts every single day.
Yep. I see most of those.
There's a lot of tools in the market. There's over 100 tools in the market. But still, our SOC is very busy. It's very bloated and ineffective to detect any attacks.
Indeed. And when you think about how ineffective we are, it seems like cybersecurity somehow got worse over the last 50 years. Somehow. I'm not sure how did that even happen, but if you can think about it, like back then networks were pretty simple. Today, like our homes are hyper-connected, right? Like,
Yep.
God knows I have like a crypto rig in my basement. I have like all kinds of like cracks and stuff. And I grew up in a home that didn't have that much computers other than a VHS. That was about it, right? Even when you go to Stuxnet, right? Like Stuxnet was not that like easy to do. They had to like circulate a virus all around the planet for a while until someone hopefully gets the USB with the virus and plugs it in to print something at the nuclear plant somewhere, right? Today, to pull off Colonial Pipeline, it was hyper-connected. They just went into these PLCs. If they wanted, they can hack any utility today through the smart grid. They can hack a million different things, because they're all attack vectors that can lead to the core utility or the core systems that we're after. And that's exactly why everybody in the SOC, in IT or OT or whatever, anybody with that kind of responsibility for figuring out an incident, any incident commander, any incident investigator, they're like, please, please, please tell me you can automate my job. This is like almost the only job that people are looking forward to get automated, right? Like no one else wants their job automated. Like God knows no driver wants autonomous driving to take their job away, but SOC analysts, on the contrary, they would love that. They would welcome that. They love these kind of talks. They're like, give me some, automate my job. I'll take it to my boss. I'll be making sure they buy this, right? Well, bad news. We're not going to automate your job. So you got to stick around for a bit. But We can figure why do you dislike your job so much, and we can tackle it. And it seems like over the last 6 years, there's an organization called SANS. We pay them a lot of money. But what they do with that money is a lot of cool things, including that they go and they do these SOC surveys. So they bring a lot of cool folks like you, and they ask them, what is the biggest challenge? What's keeping you at night? And everybody just says the same magical word, correlation. What the hell does that even mean? Like, what is correlation? But if we look at what we have today in our assets, and if you think of those as your assets over there, they're constantly buzzing. There's like historians, there's logs, there's events, there's alerts, there's stuff whether you're looking or not. It doesn't matter. You might be looking, you might not be looking, you might be ignoring them, you might be aggregating them, you might not be aggregating them. It doesn't matter. They're buzzing with data. And in this day and age, data is oil. What do you do with that oil? You usually ignore it, because we collect that data, and we don't know what the hell to do with it. However, all of that purple thingy like flying around, some of it is actually related to each other. Some of it, and I highlight them in red over there, are coordinated. They're part of the same targeted attack. They're part of the same thing. And these coordinated logs and alerts and data points, ideally you're bringing around each other, and you're seeing the full context. Because the rest might not have context at all. The rest is just like isolated stuff, false positives, whatever. Matter of fact, 99% of that data is completely useless, which is why you are completely fine sitting here today saying, you know what, I don't collect any of this, and I'm fine. Because 99% of it is garbage. But there is a teeny tiny amount that is actually coordinated, and ideally you bring that to the spotlight and you work on it, which is why we invest in intrusion detection, vulnerability management. We invest in that much data, and we would like to generate that much data. And as Lynn said, we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of budgets, we have a lot of people, making sure we have more data. So how do we make sure that these little 4 things we're grabbing together? Ideally, the traditional way is let's collect all of those in one place, right? We just aggregate them through like a SIM or whatever, and we put them in one place. But why? Why are we getting all of these data points in one place? And does anybody have them in one place? Beautiful. Nobody has them in one place. Exactly. Because it's pretty hard. You try to ask someone to bring their logs from their OT department, from the insider threat department, from the IT SOC, from a subsidiary, from a plant. People are reluctant to share their data. And every single guideline says, let's put all the data together, and once we have them together, let's query on them, and this is our investigation tool. We put everything in one place, and let's write the best queries, right? And that's essentially where the SIMs come in, right? Like Elastic, Splunk, whatever, right? Because ideally, once you have everything in one place, even if it's not a SIM, even if it's within the same product, like whatever vendor you're using, they would have a place where you can kind of like see all of the alerts. You can see an entire queue of like millions of incidents, and you can query on them. What am I going to do with a query? What is the idea of these queries? Most of the queries do nothing other than like find specific patterns. So in this case, this is a query that finds a specific like pattern of commands and web traffic. But what am I going to do with that? What's the point? Like, now I can detect stuff, so I can detect even more data, detect even more incidents. What other technologies do I have? I can have some playbooks. You know, like every vendor probably can give you a playbook of some sort. What do these playbooks do? They're essentially like steps of queries and APIs and whatnot, right? So once you find something, run a query. Get me the risk score of that asset. Get me the risk score of that plant. Get me a risk score of that identity. I'm just querying stuff so that I can find specific sequences I'm looking for that I know would exist, right? But most of the time, like, humans do not really act in that consistent fashion. So if I'm kind of like going after your plant or after your utility, I'm likely not going to be caught by a query or a playbook, right? Likely, I'm just going to fly under the radar, and I'm going to be essentially generating a bunch of stuff that you will never correlate, right? You'll never even see. And if you see it, exactly what happened in Colonial Pipeline, by the way, they looked at it, the alerts, and they were like, false positive. And they moved on. And the entire East Coast didn't have like energy for a while. The US declared a state of emergency. It was a whole mess, right? Although they had the alerts. And Mandiant and Google went to the Congress and talked about it. But essentially, what kind of tools can we use? What kind of actual tools can we look at? Well, we go back to the basics. So ideally, we look at what is happening, who is it affecting, and when did it happen, right? These are the very basics. And when we look at what is happening, there are a few nice frameworks. There's a framework called MITRE ATT&CK. You might be familiar with it. There's another framework called the Kill Chain from Lockheed Martin. There's NIST. There's a bunch of those, right? And they help us abstract what is happening, because it's very important to know what is happening. You don't want a humongous alert that your OT security person does not understand. You want to give them, like, this is exactly what's happening. If you even go to the MITRE ATT&CK, you can kind of like see exactly where does it sit and so on and so forth. Anybody familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK? OK, for those that are not familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK is essentially a humongous list of all of the techniques that could be used in cybersecurity, especially on the offensive side. And these techniques could be as simple as phishing. So in this case, if you look at the left, you would see that on the left side of the screen, there is initial access. And initial access is kind of like a column. And in that column, there is phishing and spear phishing. So that's a very specific technique. Why is that useful? Because I can open that technique, and as an absolute noob who doesn't know anything about cyber, I only know my actual plant. I'm a chemist, I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm whatever. I actually have the OT knowledge. I don't really know much about security anyways. I can now look at this, and I can be like, what the hell is phishing? And I have a whole description. What is phishing? What do I do to detect it? I have a whole list. How do I detect it? What do I do to mitigate it? I have a whole list. How to mitigate it? What are some examples of phishing used in security attacks that affected the world and are very well known that they have threat intelligence reports? I can get a list, right? So it's pretty neat as a data source, and you can find it right now on your phone. Just type in MITRE ATT&CK. It's completely free. It's pretty nice as a framework. But also what's neat is if you go from left to right, it actually shows you kind of the kill chain. So you can see it starts all the way on the left with initial access, and it keeps on going through like execution, persistence, right? And it keeps on going all the way to impact. And obviously at impact, things are bad. Initial access, you have a lot. Like how many people have like 1 million phishing alerts every year, if not more, right? Everybody. Everybody has a shit ton of phishing. So things are getting fewer till the end. But even those fewer alerts, if you do not see the causality, if you do not see the sequence, if you do not see the entire story, there is likely something that's off. And that's where we can kind of feel like there might be a false positive. So that's the what. MITRE is pretty neat when it comes to showing us these attack flows and showing us these kind of like causalities and sequentialities. And they have a project called MITRE ATT&CK Flow. Again, completely open source. You can check it out. But MITRE ATT&CK Flow is pretty neat because you can go in there and you can see every single OT attack, like the Iranian nuclear power station, whatever, power stations in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. You can even see like Equifax. You can see like a lot of the breaches that are very popular. And you can see the exact steps. You can see like this technique, and then later on, this technique, and then later on, this technique, and then later on, this technique. And you can think of, do I have enough coverage to detect those? Most likely than not, you have pretty good coverage. Like pretty decent coverage, actually. You have a lot of data. You just are not collecting it. So if you collect it, the framework would be, let me collect it, let me see these causalities, let me see these sequences. And if I have these sequences, I'm onto something when it comes to correlation and contextualization. What else can I do? I can probably also contextualize based on business knowledge. So if I have any business knowledge, I know that this identity has a service account. And this identity reports to this other identity, and they're part of this entity, which is a plant that we own in the other side of the world, right? So there's also business context that I can put together. But mainly, through correlation, I can immediately, if I'm correlating the sequentiality and the causality, I can kind of achieve a correlation that can tell me what is actually worth looking at and what could be a false positive or an isolated incident, right? So anyways, we go to the recipe to do all of that. And the first step would be, let's figure out if we can get everything a MITRE ATT&CK technique. Can every single data point in my historian, in my logs, in my events, in my alerts, get a MITRE ATT&CK technique. More likely than not, today you might have some MITRE ATT&CK technique through some IDSs. The only issue with that, they're not very consistent. Sometimes they do them for marketing. Sometimes they're out of a crowdsourced database. And when they're crowdsourced, you might think it's phishing. I might think it's valid accounts. We might disagree on the techniques. Ideally, you want something that's consistent so that we can make sure the data is pretty neat. And then after we get relevant MITRE ATT&CK techniques for everything that we have today, we now should look for similarities in these events and sequentiality of these events, but also we should look for similarity on the entities and identities affected in these events and logs and incidents. So let's get to work, shall we? We go ahead with step 1. We look for how do we get relevant MITRE ATT&CK techniques for every single event. And that's essentially a classification problem, but it's 2024. And if I come up here without an LLM, people start throwing tomatoes at me, and I don't like that. So I'm going to give you an LLM. We can achieve that with any LLM. You have a Copilot, you have a ChatGPT, you have Llama, Hugging Face, Chat, whatever it is. Any LLM would get you some sort of a natural language processing capability. And you can get a lot of LLMs for free. If you don't know how, please talk to me after I get off here. Everything that I'm showing you, you can get for free without going through like crazy open source stuff. You can do it on your phone. I promise you, today, you can customize an LLM completely for free. And you can make it do whatever you want. You can give it your business context. It can contextualize stuff. You can do whatever you want. And it's not even through our company. It's literally like through like Hugging Face, which is like similar to GitHub, but for like machine learning, right? So regardless, what do we do with that LLM? So we have that said LLM. Now what? Does the LLM like magically know everything? No. You know all of the talks and books and stuff that you're supposed to look at some point and you have bookmarked? You all have that, right? It's not only me, right? A million tabs that you never actually like look through. All of that content you can give to that LLM. So all of these links, all of these things, books, like lectures, all of that. We call that the large unlabeled corpus because it's unlabeled. And the moment you give all of that to the LLM, including business context, so you can give it like internal documents and whatnot, and that's why this LLM can be private on-prem, that LLM will then get your actual understanding. They would have an understanding of what's going on, but it will be through an unlabeled corpus. If you want to even fine-tune that LLM a little bit further, you can just give it a little Excel sheet, and that Excel sheet will have input, output, input, output, input, output. And that's where we go into fine-tuning. So for my case, where I wanted to just give it alerts and events, and it gives me MITRE ATT&CK techniques, I made a little Excel sheet. And I was like, here's an event from a historian. Here's the correct TTP. Here's the correct technique. Here's another event. Here's another technique. Here's another event. Here's another technique, right? And I kind of tried to fine-tune it based on a few data points that I know what is the correct output for. And boom, bada boom, I put that LLM to work. I give it literally whatever sentence. Like, I can make up sentences. And these made-up English sentences coming from alerts, logs, events, from my brain, from my incidents, from my historian, from my whatever, now have a MITRE ATT&CK technique. What does that offer? Now, every single alert or every single event that usually is completely garbage, today, because of this, has a complete reference point. Now I can get anybody that doesn't know anything about cyber, and I can tell them, listen, like this event, when it shows up, this is the right technique for it. They just find that technique in MITRE ATT&CK. They'll just Google that technique number, and they will get a page like this. They will know exactly how to deal with it, right? But most importantly, now that everything has a technique, I know how things are kind of related to each other from a sequencing point of view. So I know that this alert is kind of initial access. This event kind of is execution. This event kind of is persistence. This incident kind of credential access. And I know the sequentiality and the causality through the kill chain now, automatically, right? I don't have to actually sit down and do any of that. I can be in Hawaii, and this little AI is going to be like, you know, giving like techniques for everything, enriching my data with like cybersecurity context. And I can also enrich it with my business context. And I can figure out the correlation of what is actually forming a story. And when I find that cluster that forms a story, I got something to look at. 99% of the time, I'm in Hawaii sipping on my margaritas, because 99% of the time, that never happens. You never find a cluster that is completely sequential, because 99% of the time, it's isolated incidents. It's no biggie. It's a false positive, right? So let's go back to step 2. I talked about clustering. I talked about a lot of different things. How do we actually do that? So let's actually find things that are relevant now that everything has been enriched with a technique. How do I do that? All I have to do is cluster events that are related and find these clusters that are sequential to each other, that are actually causal, right? So I put everything in a humongous graph data structure, and I can kind of put whatever I want up there. So let's say I really, really want to use my information management system or HR management system or my asset inventory or my whatever. Good. Let's put that in the data structure. So here is my business unit. Here is my manager. My manager has me and has someone else who's my peer. And we both have 3 service accounts. I'm usually in charge of the chemical plant. My peer is in charge of the mechanical stuff and the networks and the systems and pretty much everything. Good luck to him. And my manager doesn't do much. And my business unit is kind of focused on IT. That business context, when I put now when there is an incident that is affecting one of my service accounts or one of the service accounts of my peer or one of the devices from my peer, they're kind of seen as similar. Why are they similar? Because from a business context, we kind of have a similar role, right? Or business context could be, chemical plants have these different machines, different pumps, different PLCs, different whatever, and there's business context around them, such as service life, when should they be replaced, maybe vulnerabilities, maybe whatever. So whatever context I have, whatever knowledge I have stuck in my brain, I have to just write down somewhere in some format. Would be ideal if it's in a table, would be ideal if it's in a graph, but I can also just put it in text and give it to the same LLM, and the LLM would make a graph. But as long as I take my business and my OT knowledge out of my brain and put it somewhere, I can literally have an AI take care of finding stuff that is business context related to each other or business context sequential to each other, right? So once I have that critical piece, now it's the data science stuff. You don't have to worry about it. An LLM would build it for you again. But essentially what we do is we take all of these little incidents and events and logs and alerts, and we ask the clustering algorithm to do its magic and put them together. How does it actually do that? You might be interested. It actually does that by taking every single event and log and incident and alert and whatever it is, and that data point now has a 3D coordinate address, right? So we put it into a 3D coordinate system, and you can think of this log is here, this alert is here, and there's another event that's here, and these two are kind of closer to each other than this other one. So now this is a cluster. And what we do is, if this cluster has the property of showing causality, so let's say this cluster has events and logs and alerts through the last 2 months that affected my service accounts in my plant, and these logs and events and alerts are coming from 1 million different vendors, like there's Dragos, Palo Alto, Clarity, I don't know, whatever it is, right? So I have a lot of things in that cluster. There's let's say 30 data points or even 300 data points. Do these 300 data points during these months coming from these vendors or coming from these historians or whatever, do these 300 data points represent a sequence? Am I seeing some sort of a causality? And if I am, I gotta come back from Hawaii and I gotta do something about it. If they don't have a causality, it's all right. We can live another day, right? Because we don't have to worry about it. It's likely an isolated incident or a false positive. So that's pretty much the idea. We implement a little clustering algorithm, and what we get here is essentially data from the Communication Security Establishment, which is the CIA of Canada, but they're a lot nicer than the CIA. They actually give us data, and they allow us to talk about it. But essentially, we had 2,500 alerts. And 2,500 alerts is a humongous queue. There is no technician or analyst or security engineer in the world that can actually go through 2,500 alerts in time. Not even in a week, not even in a month. That's not a number you can go through. So traditionally, what they would do is they would go through the 2,500, and they would filter. They would have one, they would look at it, and the rest No one cares. Never do we ever look at it. We're collecting this much data for compliance or something. Not sure why we're collecting it, but we're not using it. What the clustering was doing for them is it took 2,500, performed clustering, which is essentially data reduction, and we ended up with 8 groups of stuff, 8 groups of data points. And these groups of data points were showing them the alerts and logs and events and all the stuff that's good over there. And some of them were actually representing causality. And what was interesting was we had an actual score, and our NMI was 81. And we were like, oh, that's a pretty neat score. We did amazing. This is pretty cool. But when we sent them this list, they realized that some of the things that we gave them, they were not even known to their team, and hence the score didn't make much sense because we're checking against something that they thought they knew completely. But when they realized the much better context that we were able to provide them, because it's clustering is better than humans investigating stuff through queries, they were like, wow, OK, you definitely beat the expectations because we thought we knew what was going on. You told us better. So regardless, that was a pretty cool experiment in how humans, even when they're trying to make a data set that is completely ground truth and they know exactly what's going on, they still don't know everything about it. So let's recap. What is it that we're proposing? We're proposing that you build an LLM. The LLM would build you some sort of a technique detector. And then we are proposing that you build a little teeny tiny clustering algorithm that can run without any GPUs, can run completely on-prem, can run on terabytes and terabytes of data that you will never look at. And these terabytes and terabytes of data can be sitting in a million different places. Because it's not a platform, it's not a humongous SIM or whatever, it's literally a clustering algorithm. So you can connect it to your SIM, you can connect it to also another S3 bucket or another database or another JSON file or another CSV file, whatever it is. Whatever you have in your data, connect it to that teeny tiny clustering algorithm. And once it has its techniques, it will perform clustering, and it will show you things that are representing a flow that is sequential and causal and is actually worth looking at. Not only that, but because it had techniques, you don't need the best of the best of the best in cybersecurity to look at these clusters. They literally have the techniques. And what do techniques have in MITRE ATT&CK? They have detections and mitigations. They have advisories. They have a lot of stuff. And the LLM, once you give it a cluster, it can also give you a bunch of recommendations on what to do, because you encoded your business context knowledge and your OT knowledge for that AI. So now this AI can actually spit pretty useful stuff back at you instead of being completely garbage, right? Because if you remember, we talked about actually customizing the AI and not just using an AI off the shelf from some vendor or some whatever. Like, we actually customized it with our own knowledge. Now it's not bullocks anymore. Now it's actually spitting proper stuff back at us, only when it finds a cluster that is actually worth looking at because it's a targeted attack instead of a bunch of noise. And we have a lot of noise. So what do you get? I mean, pretty straightforward, but you get a lot better detections for these kind of targeted attacks that would take down Colonial Pipeline or whatever. You definitely get a much better remediation time, because although you're in Hawaii, you actually find the complete context. So while you fly back, you're still faster because you're not investigating. You're not looking for stuff. You already have all of the stuff. You don't have to look for it. You just have to react. You're not looking. You're not investigating, right? Because you kind of outsource this investigation to this kind of open source AI, right? And definitely, you're going to increase your productivity. You're going to also increase your acumen, because you might not be the best cybersecurity pro in the world, but when your AI is being your sidekick and it's giving you your, your mitigations, recommendations, techniques, you're kind of increasing your cybersecurity acumen. So I can bring up a junior and put them on something like this instead of waiting around for the best senior in the entire planet to fly back and help me out. Definitely increased accuracy and all of that. But essentially, to recap, instead of tabular stuff, instead of one incident at a time, you finally have an actual group of incidents to look at the same time, instead of just buzzing with isolated and siloed alerts and events and data points. You just have an entire cluster of them. That's about it. I don't know if you have any questions, but I took a lot more time than I should. But I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Very, very grateful and humbled to be here. I hope you enjoyed your conference, and thank you very much. I'd love to take 1,000,000 questions. Go for it. Do we have the little cool microphones? Oh, yes. There we go. Ooh, damn. All right. There you go.
Hey, Ez. Hey.
What's up?
My bearded brother. Just real quick question. As far as like the overhead and the processing, what does that look like as far as how much that particular system, whatever it takes to aggregate all that data? Is that a pretty robust system as far as the hardware, memory, power, all of those things?
Right on point. So this is exactly why when we were kind of like talking about the clustering piece, we were talking about like a clustering algorithm. And the reason why we're using a clustering algorithm is, first of all, it's not real time. You can do it real time. You can do it in a batch. So you can run it every 12 hours. You can run it every month. You can run it every year if you want. It depends on your needs on how to run that clustering algorithm. But also a clustering algorithm doesn't really need a GPU and doesn't really, is never CPU intensive. It might get a little memory intensive, but you can really customize it. You can customize like how much data you're feeding in a singular batch. Like some of our customers are like putting like 4 terabytes in a batch. Like 4 terabytes for them is like 24 hours. So every 24 hours they're running it once. And that takes about 2 CPUs at 100% utilization. It takes about 6 gigabytes of RAM at 100% utilization, but that is over within like 70 seconds. So yes, you're gonna max out your 2 CPUs and memory, but for like 70 seconds. If you would like to spread out the 70 seconds to a lot more, and they didn't want to, like they just wanted to be like, get it over with at the end of the day during that time, if you want to spread it out, you can, and you can make it like a lot cheaper on the CPU and memory side. But also you can choose not to put 4 terabytes. You can choose to do it like 4 times a day, 1 terabyte at a time. So it's very configurable because it's open source and you can kind of like do whatever you want. Definitely the more expensive side of this system would be obviously the LLM, because the LLM is going to take a GPU, or on best cases, it's going to take like a lot of CPU and a lot of memory. But the good thing is, this is just tagging your rule set. So how many rules do you have? Or how many alerts or events or logs do you have? Like how many sentences are we tagging? Let's just tag them all at once. There's no PII, there's no sensitive data. Let's just tag them all at once, whatever, and just make an Excel sheet with all of that, and just keep that Excel sheet on-prem, and we never use the LLM again. So the LLM is like once in your life, and then the clustering is completely configurable, but you can kind of like customize how much power you want to give it. Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Any other questions? I either explained everything perfectly, or you guys understand nothing. I like to think it's the first one. Is it the end of the conference? Too long. Lunch was heavy. Yes. Can we throw the? Oh yes. Hike.
Who was it?
Oh. Oh, nice. That was pretty good. Good catch, Kareem.
Yeah, okay, so
Yes.
just on average, or if you can provide it, about how long does it take to develop something like this?
So this is not supervised in any fashion. The only supervised part, which is like how long does it take in training, so supervised means like there's training, is the LLM. And the LLM today doesn't actually like train. Like you kind of like just give it that context in real time. So how long would it take you to open your phone and like type in all of the information that you have in your brain about cybersecurity, or all of the links? Like maybe like 5 minutes, because I have them like bookmarked, a lot of links for things that I never look at, that I should look at. And then the small labeled corpus, like I already have an open source version, so you can use it. So the LLM part would take you like maybe like an hour, literally on your phone, if that LLM is online. If that LLM is on-prem, because you don't want to do it online, although it's just like nothing sensitive there, you would have to like install like Olama or something and have a Llama on-prem. That might take a while. That might take up to like 2 days to get someone to actually be free enough to actually learn Olama and install it and have your local LLM, but that would be worth it. Now on the clustering side, it's completely unsupervised. However, Instead of training, you have time that you are putting encoding knowledge in your brain in a document or a sheet or something that the LLM can take and make a graph out of. And that could be a lot. Like, that could be like 10 hours, right? Or it could be, I went to my Splunk and I downloaded my asset list. I went to my asset inventory, downloaded that list. I went to my vulnerability management, downloaded that list. And I went to my HR management system, downloaded that list. And I just downloaded a bunch of stuff, right, that has my business knowledge. And then I wrote a page, all in all within like maybe another 2 days. And now all of my knowledge, to the best of my ability, is kind of in one place. Good luck to you. And you give it to the LLM, and you tell the LLM make a graph out of it that could be used for clustering, and the LLM would make you that code, or you can use our code. You can also use like our knowledge, but it wouldn't fit you. You would like it customized, but you would end up essentially having the flow detector and the clustering in a couple days. So in worst case, 2 days here, 2 days there. Worst case, like a week, really. Like, it's not really that heavy, because it's not like customized, super duper duper, like based on your training data. It's just customized on your knowledge. And knowledge is easier than training, because training you can think of as like anomaly detection. You're having like a baseline, and then, oh, something is different. And we are not doing that. We are just saying, like, what do you know? Like, who does this guy work for? Who does she work for? What kind of service accounts are doing what? What kind of plants are doing what? That's easy to extract right away and just put in a clustering algorithm. So I'll give it a week. Thank you. Great question. Great hike. That was amazing. Pretty cool. Any other questions? All right. If not too many questions, please find us on LinkedIn and send us a million questions over there. We'll be more than happy to help out in any way. You can also find our open source stuff on Cypienta. You can go to GitHub, look at GitHub Cypienta. You can even find a bunch of projects about like auto mapping stuff and whatnot. Because remember when I said like all kinds of alerts and logs and events and incidents and data points, they all come in different formats, right? And Joe was just talking about that the other day. They all have different formats. So we built another LLM that's open source that would take anything in any format and just makes it into whatever one format you would like. And then that would be used for the clustering. But anyways, a lot of cool stuff that we built open source. Please check it out, cypienta.com or github.com/cypienta. Anyways, appreciate you. Thank you very much. Take care. Yeah.